Good morning, everybody. Please can I welcome you to this meeting of the Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Community and Housing Decision Day, taking place from the Wharton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is now 9:30. My name is Councillor Paula Ferguson, Chairperson, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Community and Housing. Please can I advise that this meeting is being audio recorded and live streamed from the Council website. In addition, a video recording of the meeting will be uploaded to the Council's YouTube channel after the meeting. Can I please remind any officers who are joining us? I don't believe there are.
Thank you, Chair.
So I don't need to remind anybody. Can I also remind members? Again, we don't have any speak today. For the officers who are in the room, and also to Mr. Chafe and Mr. Light, who we're really pleased to welcome from. If you do want to speak, can I please remind you to speak directly into your mic, to put it on, so that we can hear. If anyone has a mobile phone on, please. Very much. And then we can begin the. The first item is, do we have any disclosures of interest? The only member here, and I have note that as not. We don't also have, the next item is participation. Again, today we don't have anyone. Although public participation is always welcome at this. But we were expecting Councillor Correll to be speaking as a councillor representative, but unfortunately she has been unable to attend today. She has sent a message to say that she's looked at both papers very thoroughly and she supports the recommendation. So we'll bear that in mind as we move. So the first paper that we're looking at today is the Landlord Letting Policy, CD6. Russell, would you like to introduce the paper?
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson, of course. So my name's Amber Russell. I'm the Service Lead for Housing Operations and Community Safety, and I'm outlining this paper today. As a stock holding local authority, the Council has its own landlord lettings policy for its council owns social and affordable properties. This policy is separate from the scheme of allocation that the Council has and also the Hampshire Home Choice sub-regional scheme. It's the landlord lettings policy which has undergone a review in consultation with officers, members, the district-wide tenant and leaseholder forum, Tenants and Council Together, otherwise known as TACT, and our housing partners. And the report that I'm presenting highlights the key changes to the landlord lettings policy, which include providing greater clarity to eligibility for some types of housing, strengthening grounds for refusal in relation to antisocial behaviour, plus changes in practice and emerging issues facing the housing service. And the recommendation today is that the revised landlord lettings policy be adopted. So just as a very brief summary, the landlord lettings policy outlines the measures in place from initially advertising a property to signing up the successful applicant. It details the measures that the tenancy team have in place when offering a tenancy, which includes the suitability of applicants, the circumstances in which the council may refuse an applicant nominated through the Hampshire Home Choice framework. The policy is there to ensure that we let our council homes in a fair and equitable manner, and we're consistent in our practice. As I said, the policy has been amended and most of the criteria remain the same. However, there are a few changes, and I just want to quickly highlight what those are. There are new clause has been added providing a timescale for refusal decisions. So that explains that on occasions we may not consider the same applicant for a period of 6 months if they are refused. A new section which outlines all the support that we give to applicants who are seeking access to our council housing, so that's very positive. The age restrictions for sheltered housing and housing designated for older persons, for example, our bungalows, has been further clarified. Again, we had feedback from our residents that that wasn't clear, so the policy has strengthened that and hopefully made that clearer for applicants. A section has been expanded on our hard to let properties. So again, hopefully that gives further clarity. The categories for refusal also have been amended to make them clearer, and we've added a few additional clauses in relation to antisocial behaviour. And that, Chair, is a summary of the key changes to the housing landlords lettings policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. I wondered, Mr. Light or Mr. Chafe, if either of you had any specific points or questions that you wanted to raise. I know that we did talk on the phone about this Friday.
Yeah, I think we back the policies. We had a meeting with the council rather, and they outlined the proposals, and we seem to be mostly in agreement with it, most of us. So I think I can back it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Light. And just to be clear, the two big changes for me are around the criteria for the so that it's for anyone 60 and anyone living with them be over 50 unless there are exceptional circumstances. And then the second really large change, or two other changes. One was where we potentially could under occupancy let for those flats. And the third point primarily was around strengthening our hand with regards to social behaviour. And all of those points you're with?
Yes, I am, Chair, and thank you for summarising them better than I did.
If I may, Ms. Russell, I have a couple of questions. I note in the clauses around the antisocial behaviour that they feel quite stringent, quite strict in many ways. And I just wondered what opportunities there will be for people to sort of redeem themselves, to give them a chance to get back on to perhaps clarify.
Yes, we do give people opportunities. For example, this week we've just signed up a previous tenant who we had evicted for antisocial behaviour a number of years ago. But through our pre-letting assessment procedure, we met with that resident. He discussed his circumstances and the changes that he's made over the years. And we've signed an acceptable behaviour contract moving forward with him at the start of this tenancy, so we're very clear on expectations moving forward. So that's not to say that if people haven't behaved antisocially in the past, they won't be given another opportunity, obviously, if they can demonstrate that their circumstances have changed, etc. So we will work with our applicants, our customers moving forward, even if in the past they've had some tricky situations which they maybe haven't dealt with as best as they could have done.
Thank you for that answer. And just to follow on from that, I note in the policy now, we will allow after 6 months, we will reconsider anybody who has used. For those who have that antisocial behaviour background, is it also 6 months? Or is there a longer?
The 6 months is primarily if we're not going to re-look at any further nominations that have been put forward. So say, for example, if we've refused somebody prior to this policy change, somebody could reapply the next week and then obviously have to go through the same scenario, which isn't good for them or for us either. So that gives that greater clarity. But as I said earlier, there are timeframes in the policy. For example, looking at very serious antisocial behaviour, usually within the last 2 years. But when, for example, people have been evicted, then we may look at antisocial behaviour that's that's taken place even earlier than 2 years. But as I tried to explain earlier, if people do demonstrate that they've changed their circumstances and they understand the failings of previous tenancies, and they're committed to work with us moving forward, then we will give them opportunities to live in our housing stock.
Thank you again, Ms. Russell. Obviously, I'm very cognizant of the fact that those people who are struggling, we don't want to remove them from, give them the opportunities to make that first important step, normalise their lives. So it's good to hear that we do look at individually and we do take their own actions to remediate this situation into consideration. So it's really good to hear. It certainly sort of chimes with this feeling of us being a more compassionate social landlord. So that's really good. I just had one final question, which was, when was the policy last updated and when will we look at it again?
So the policy was last previously to this. I'm trying to look on the paper now to see if it's got the date. I think it was in 2019. So we will be looking to review this policy, she says, flicking through to see where it is. The next time will be 2025. But again, I'm very conscious that if there are changes in legislation or if there are other, we're always looking to keep things up to date. So if we're getting feedback about things not working, whether that's from officers or from members or from residents, then we can do another review certainly before that date. But it's 2025 that the policy is next due to be updated and reviewed.
Thank you very much. And again, both Mr. Light and Mr. Chafe, obviously your view is that this policy would need to be reviewed sooner than 2025, then that's important. You know, we do that and we work together on this. Great, thank you. So sorry, are there any more comments you'd like to make, Mr. Light or Mr. Chafe?
Just to say, yes, we're willing to do that if we think there needs to be changes in the policy. Yeah.
Sorry, that's great. Thank you. So having looked at this policy in some detail and having sort of asked the questions I have today, and obviously I did discuss it with you, Ms. Ross, and we did have a discussion, Ms. Knight. I'm very happy to support the recommendations that have been forward. I welcome particularly the new clause around the extra support, helping people through the process for tenancy. I also think that the change on the hard to let properties is an important step in that we don't want to have properties that are void when perhaps they're waiting for homes who would use them. So hard to let 2-bedroom. Obviously being cognizant of the fact that for those tenants there may be an under charge to them. I also welcome the clarity around the homes for older people who can live in those homes with them. But again, I think it's important to note that there is a clause within that that says in exceptional circumstance, relative who is younger, who is primary carer, so that's also good. So the policy isn't totally rigid. I'm also pleased that we have those clauses to protect us against tenants of that background, but also again that we remain compassionate in our approach to those people as they move. Therefore, the recommendation is that the revised landlord lettings policy be adopted and to approve that.
Councillor Ferguson, before we move forward to the next item, I'll ask you to pull your microphone.
Is that better? Thank you. I speak very quietly, unfortunately. Or if you're my husband, you think that's fortunate. Right, the second paper that we are looking at today is the installation works to voids, a variation to the Osborne term maintenance contract. And I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Kingston, who's here today to give us a brief introduction to this paper. Thank you, Mr. Kingston.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report seeks approval to issue a variation to Osborne, who already undertake a void reinstatement works for the council as part of their 15-year contract, which runs from 2011 to 2026. You'll see under 3.2, before we're able to do this, we really need to jump through a couple of hoops, so to speak. First one is we need to comply with the Public Contract Regulations 2015. Which we've been able to do if, as it says at the top of page numbers, at the end of 3.2, at the top of the following page, if it would cause significant inconvenience or substantial disruption, then we have grounds to issue this variation to Osborne under those contract agreement regulations. So that ticks one box, we can do that. As a belt and braces thing, what we've also done is we've issued a contract notice so that this puts other contractors on notice that the council intends to do this, and do they have any challenges to what we're proposing to do. That was done in October and there were no challenges to that. So that almost ticks the European contract regulations box. The second thing we need to get ticked rather, is our own contract procedure rules, our own city council contract procedure rules. So this would need to be approved as an exception to our normal standing rules, because we can't just issue a 1.25 million contract of our want. So that's the second box. In terms of risks, which key risk is being challenged, and under the risk section 7, I think we mitigated all the risks. We put it out there, we said what we're going to do. There were no challenges, as I've already said. If somebody did now challenge it, once we've issued the work to Osborne, then they would have there'll be a much lower chance of it being upheld by a court, because we follow the due process in terms of putting it on notice what we intended to do. So right at the bottom where it says 8.2, trying to keep it as simple as I can. This report is simply about final approval to complete this variation to Osborne under our own contract procedure rules. We've ticked all the other boxes. That's what this report is really about. You'll see under 9.1, the only other option to doing what we're suggesting is to retender these additional carbon works to another contractor. But that is fraught with additional risks, certainly as far as I'm concerned. One, you could tender it, you could end up paying more. We're not sure what it's going to cost at the moment. We have a budget for it, but we're going to do a lot of the early voids under what they call a day work basis to try and get a true analysis of the costs, and then we can agree schedule rates on the back of that to get the costs really nailed down. You might end up with a contractor that's not as good as Osborne. Another fear. We're going to disrupt the existing void procedure, so void processes. So if you've got Osborne working in it for a couple of weeks, and then you get another third party involved, the void periods are just going to extend and extend. I suppose the bigger concern for me is if you have two contractors working one after the other, even concurrently, if we then get problems with these carbon works 6 months or a year down the road, it's going to be very hard to prove who's been liable. So it's better to keep it with one contractor as far as I'm concerned. So I hope we don't get problems, but if we do get problems, we can say, well, it was Osborne that had been doing the work. So there are clear, my perspective, this is the lowest risk option. In terms of the recommendation, so all we're asking for really is that the variation be approved, that our head of legal services can then enter into contract for this variation with Osborne, and that the exception is approved under contract procedure rules. And you know, in summary, someone has to do these works. So if it wasn't Osborne, it could be another, but the lowest risk for us at this point is to use Osborne. The variation is worded in such a way that if it doesn't work out with Osborne, then we can cut it short or park company on doing these works. That would be the worst scenario as far as I'm concerned. But that fallback is there as well. So we're not guaranteeing the work for Osborne for 5 years. We're saying we're going to trial it. We're going to see if it works. If it doesn't work, we do have to part company for whatever reason. Park company. So hopefully it's fairly clear. I think that concludes my introduction, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kingston. Mr. Light, Mr. Chafe, I believe Mr. Kingston, can I ask you to turn off your mic? Thank you. I believe that Mr. Kingston did speak to you about this policy as well, that's extension of the Osborne contract for the voids, for the retrofitting of the voids. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And we thought it'd be best to stick with Osborne to do the work because, well, for the reasons that Mr. Kingston has just said. So we thought it'd be less hassle and, you know, in trying to find somebody else to do the work as well, you know.
Thank you, Mr. Light. Can I also just ask, in general, are you happy with the work that Osborne's do in terms of maintaining these?
Yes, we're very happy with what work Osborne's do and pleased that this work is now going to proceed as the money is there, and we're all keen to get this work underway and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Light, and thank you, Mr. Chafe, for those comments. Mr. Kingston, I have a couple of questions, but you actually answered one of them right at the end of your introduction. I'm actually pleased that the contract isn't for an additional 5 years, that it is actually going to be for the first year, so that we have the opportunity to learn alongside Osborne what works, what doesn't work. And we also have a chance to review that contract to make sure that they are the best people to do the work that we need undertaking the retrofitting of the voids. I did ask you to ask Osborne, obviously the council is very clear about its own carbon reduction ambitions. We're very clear about our attitude towards the climate emergency and our responsibility around carbon reduction. Can I ask, when you asked Osborne, what are their carbon reduction credentials, please?
Osborne have their own carbon reduction targets. They're hoping to be net zero by 2035, so a bit longer than the council's goals. They have a number of initiatives in place where they're trying to reduce carbon through their natural operations, basically. So, you know, they're looking for all their fleet is already Euro 6 compliant. They're partnered with the Carbon Trust, so they're looking at all the measures that will hopefully reduce their carbon and their impact in terms of waste and things like that. A lot of the company cars are being reduced to hybrid options now. They have route planning software, which they've always had to reduce the length of journeys. They're trying to reduce repeat visits, so the number of visits are cut down. In terms of waste, they've actually reduced their wastage tonnage by about 20% since 16-17, and they're hoping to target 90% of what currently goes to landfill to stop it going to landfill. And they've got smart waste software, and they're also accredited to ISO 14001. So they're looking at all their waste operations, if you put it that way, following the waste hierarchy, the economy, the circular economy. They're even looking to order a lot less, so the ordering is a lot less but more frequent. So they don't hold stores on site, they hold it off site, they bring it to site, they use it. They're hoping that will reduce waste and over ordering as well. So they have a number of work streams where they're, you know, this whole principle about moving away from replacing and repairing now, very wasteful economy. I think everyone's really looking at that whole thing. Can it be repaired as opposed to renewed now?
Thank you very much, Mr. Kingston. Another question I have and have raised with you and also spoken to Mr. Light about is obviously Osborne's do our work generally in bringing our voids back up to standard. Will this be a separate team working on the retrofit, or is there a danger that they will divert resources so we may find that they lag behind in the other work they do for us? Thank you.
No, we're promised a separate team, a separate supervisor. So this will be a separate team that's been trained up to carry out Trustmark work. They're constantly training up their existing tradesmen to carry out these sort of works as sort of like things gather pace on these carbon works. So no, I would hope it doesn't affect anything they currently do. It should be a separate team. We still have to see how long some of these works are going to take. I mean, the current void period is about 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah, so it's 2.5 weeks for normal void works. I think early on these works could add another 3 or 4 works, but I'm hoping that as we accelerate and gather pace, the works will reduce. So I'm hoping that we could do the full void works and the carbon works in 4 weeks of becoming empty. A lot of the secret is trying to get as much done while the existing tenant is still in situ. So if they will let us in, if they will let us do the assessments, if we can gear up to when it becomes empty, then that's where the time can really be gained. And in terms of waste and things like that in the voids, we will be trialing things like off-site cut insulation, laser cutting insulation. So again, it comes to site, pre-cut, no waste. Again, the success of that, we don't know. We've never tried it before. But, you know, Osborne are very keen to try some of these new technologies and new processes actually within the void.
Thank you, Mr. Kingston. Mr. Light or Mr. Chafe, are there any additional questions that you'd like to ask just before we bring this one to the close?
No, I don't. I don't know about David.
No, I think we've covered everything that we were concerned about.
Thank you both. I'm very happy again, having looked at this paper in detail, having talked both to Mr. Kingston about it and to Mr. Light about it, that to approve the recommendations. Obviously, the council does have a very clear agenda around carbon reduction. The 15.8 million that we've put aside over 10 years to do the retrofitting to the council homes is substantial. We do recognise, particularly in the current cost of living crisis, that the extent to which we can make those homes more insulated, more fuel efficient, as well as reducing the carbon, is going to have a big impact on the tenants who live in those properties. Therefore, I think it's right that we press on with this work. And your recommendation, Mr. Kingston, that we use our current contractors who are going to have a separate team with a separate supervisor to do this work, to make sure it gets done quickly, that we learn with them. I think all of those are important points. I also think it is important that we're always cognizant that we don't want to leave a property void for too long. We want to hit void for the shortest period. We have people on a housing list who need homes, and equally in terms of the HRA, we also don't want to lose the income on those homes. So from that perspective, having considered the paper, having considered our discussion today, I'm happy to approve the recommendations, which are to approve the issuing of the variation for the additional installation works to Osborne Property Services Limited, to authorise the service lead legal to complete the variation agreement between the council and Osborne Property Limited on agreed terms, to approve an exception to the council's contract procedure rules in accordance with paragraph 41 of the Constitution to enable the variation to the contract. I would also ask Mr. Kingston that when we come to review, that I'm included in that review of how the work's gone. The council has said, this administration of the council has said, we want to go greener faster. So that's obviously something we want to look at, what we can learn, how we can scale it, and how we can do more to benefit primarily the tenants to live more in more fuel efficient, more carbon, that produce more carbon, less carbon homes. Okay, Thank you very much. It's now 10 o'clock. I have to be honest, having chaired the Health and Environment Policy Committee, having been on Cabinet and on scrutiny, this is the shortest meeting I have ever been at or chaired. So I'd like to thank you for your time, Mr. Russell, Mr. Kingston, Mr. Light, Mr. Chafe, Mrs. Knight and Buchanan. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your week.